like a reward for the people who have the patience to stay on, so it will be the best panel, of course. I am Alina Bărgăoanu. I am a professor in EU communication and also the president of the administration board of the European Institute of Romania. And I have a very difficult mission and highly intelligent mission today to try to keep the time limits. Because really, and I'm sorry for being a little bit insistent on this, but we are running a little bit late, and our Polish colleagues really have to go at around 1:30, so I will ask everybody to stick to the schedule. We have heard during the previous panel a lot from our Romanian specialists. Now it is time to hear from our friends from the Visegrad group, representatives of the countries in the Visegrad group. So without further ado, I will invite our first speaker from Poland, Małgorzata Kaluzinska. I hope this is your name. I mean, I pronounce it correctly. So I will invite you to present your view, the view from Poland and the view from the department to which you belong. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I apologize for having such a long and difficult name to pronounce. So much has been already said on future multi-annual financial framework and on the challenges ahead of us. I will try to be brief. Well, first of all, we should all remind ourselves that discussion about the new multi-annual financial framework has already started. Well, the Commission has the obligation to present the proposal for the MFF after 2020 by the end of 2017. But already in June 2015, Germany organized the first conference on the future MFF after 2020. It was followed by the Dutch presidency conference in January this year, and again followed by the Slovak presidency a couple of weeks ago. So we are already in the mood of discussion how the MFF after 2020 should look like. So I will try during my presentation say a little bit about what we can expect, what we know, what we don't know about the MFF after 2020, and why we should cooperate quite closely together, not only in V4 countries which are represented in this panel, but why we should build big coalitions for these future negotiations. Well, from the review of the current perspective, we can already draw a conclusion that the future MFF negotiations are going to be very difficult. So the process is going to be more difficult than it was in the past. So I think we will see a lot of changes or attempt to introduce changes in the budget. It's not something completely new. The European budget has been changed in the previous years. There has been the evolution in the MFF budget, but the question is, are we going to face the evolution this time, or are we going to witness the revolution? After 2020, we can assume that we are not going to have one of the big net pays to the European budget. UK, if everything goes according to the plan, so if the notification will be made next year, will not be the EU member state. UK is the second largest net payer to the European budget, even if we consider the British rebate. We don't know what kind of relationship the UK and the EU is going to have after the exit. So we don't know what kind of access to the single market UK is going to have after 2020. So we don't know at this stage what kind of the contribution to the European budget will be paid by the UK. Well, we already noticed during this review and in the debate that there is a need to accommodate all major needs and priorities of the European Union, and there is a need to tackle the new problems, security and migration. But from the Polish perspective, it's quite important not to exchange old for new. So we believe that the so-called old priorities, they simply do not disappear after 2020. They are going to continue. So as it was already said, new priorities should be financed on top of the current expenditure. I think it's also important not to build this mode of the competition between old and new, and also not to build the competition between the cohesion policy and Horizon and other instruments that are under the competitiveness part of the budget. And I also believe that it's not right to build a competition between the different ways of the payments for the European budget. So centrally based programs and shared management programs. I mean, we should come to this conclusion that those two approaches, they simply complement each other and they are not in the competition. And I think it's also for the future quite important to have a right balance between the flexibility and predictability of the budget. And I think it was already mentioned today, but there is also a question of absorption. I believe that in the future debate, the question of absorption will play a significant role. So there will be a lot of questions being asked about the level of absorption, but also about the quality of absorption, and we are not going to escape from those questions. I think one element which we don't know for this future MFF negotiation is the reference point. In the past, Europe 2020 has been a reference point for the budget. Somehow economic strategy disappeared from the European agenda, and we don't know it's going to be continued or is it going to be replaced by something else. So it means that we are missing a reference point. When we talk about the cohesion policy, I think it's quite important to show the achievements, but it's also important. Also, the way how we are shown those achievements is quite important. If I will mention such areas of investment as research and development, as innovation, as SMEs, as employment, social inclusion, education, many might point to Horizon or Erasmus, but these are the areas which at this stage the reform cohesion policy is financing in member states. Well, I think that it's also important to show the benefits for the rest of the European Union on the cohesion policy. Well, in Poland, our Ministry of Economic Development updated the study showing direct and indirect benefits for EU15 from the implementation of the cohesion policy in V4 countries. This report has been prepared in cooperation with V4 countries, so we can show how much those countries are benefiting because of the investments that are being done in our countries. And I think it's also important to remind that the cohesion policy is big investment policy of the European Union. I think it's very often forgotten, or some are jumping too quickly to the conclusions that the cohesion policy is simply outdated policy financing outdated projects, which is not, of course, the case. We should build the similar arguments when it comes to the CAP policy, which for Poland is going to be one of the important policies as well. It's the CAP has been already reformed. It's the policy that allows European Union to deliver the environmental and climate objectives. It prevents a harmful rise in agricultural subsidies. So these are arguments that we should all bring up. But we of course know that there are changes introduced in the budget, new instruments are being proposed, and well, we are trying to adapt to those new instruments and new ideas, not to reject them. And I think in the Polish case, the best example is the Juncker's plan. Well, at the very beginning of the implementation of Juncker's plan, we shared a similar view as many countries, that there is no right geographical balance in the usage of this fund. But we've made a promise to ourselves that we are going to change the situation, and there was well, a lot of action on the administrative side. So our Ministry of Economic Development promoted the program. We have managed to build a list of projects that could be financed via infrastructure window, but also the European Investment Bank, together with our development bank in Poland, made a lot of promotion to the SME sector. And after a few weeks and months, we became one of the top beneficiaries of this plan. So from really lagging behind, we are in the top 5 countries benefiting from this program. But as I mentioned at the very beginning, the discussion has already started on the next MFF, and we should be quite active in this discussion and have a common voice and build a common position, and have a different narrative that has been already presented by many other countries. Thank you.
Let me express the thanks on behalf of the whole room to our Polish speaker with this very short and insightful presentation. I suggest that we go directly to our Czech co-panelist, and hopefully we'll have some time for reactions to what is being said during the panel once our panelists.
So good afternoon. My name is Michal Částek. I'm from the Ministry of Finance of the Czech Republic, and I'm head of the unit of the EU budget. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me and my colleagues to this conference. It's very useful to discuss possible common position we could have on the next multiannual financial framework. So I will try to outline key elements, key factors, which from our perspective will be the key issues to discuss during the next MFF. Many of them were already mentioned by Małgorzata, our Polish colleague, so I will skip them if possible. So firstly, there will be discussion on the period of the next MFF, and then we can expect something like institutional clash, because Council traditionally supports keeping 7-year period, and on the other hand, institutions like EP, European Parliament and European Commission is insisting on shortening the MFF and linking it to their mandate and have only 5-year period or 5+5 period. So this might be the first challenge for the next discussion. There is a volume of the MFF, so in share of the EU GNI, then flexibility of the future flexibility instruments of the future financial framework, expenditure side, if there will be a change of the structure of expanding policies, and more focus put on the new priorities, then discussion on the revenue side and its possible reform, and of course impact of Brexit is also open question. So regarding the seven-year, regarding the period of the MFF, the Czech Republic, we assume is supporting keeping the period because it's necessary, especially for the multi-annual programs, that it ensures appropriate time for implementation of multi-annual programs. Regarding the EU budget level, we expect there that the discussion will be affected by the Brexit, by the exit of the European Kingdom, and the discussion will be about the average of commitment, about the level of commitments, and it will be almost the same according to our expectations. It will be around 1% of GNI. Regarding the flexibility of the EU budget and the potential of the EU budget to react to unexpected events, so our preliminary position is that there should be deeper discussion on its consolidation, because now the flexibility instruments and mechanisms are very, very complicated. There are many instruments and there are different procedures for their mobilization, and it's difficult for member states to estimate how much budget is needing is still in each flexibility instrument. So we, as the Czech Republic, we will strive for like simplification and consolidation of the flexibility instruments for the next MFF period. Regarding the expenditure side, so as Margareta said, we can expect here like also fight between the policies, like a shared management policies, where, or so-called traditional policies, where the national envelopes are allocated. It means cohesion policy and common agriculture policy on one hand, and policies which are implemented in direct or indirect management implementation, like programs like Horizon, Connecting Europe Facility, programs in external relations or in heading 3, it means in security and migration. We assume that the cohesion policy will remain our main priority on the expenditure side in Czech Republic, and there are many pros and cons which will be debated during the future cohesion or on the future of the cohesion policy. So, of course, pros which are positive impacts, which were already mentioned, are significant impact on development of our economies. It has been estimated by the European Commission that the GDP of the Czech Republic in 2015 was 4% higher due to the interventions of Structure and Cohesion Fund of the period 2007-2013, and also the cohesion policy contributes to convergence of region, which is slow in the last years, but still is undergoing despite the financial crisis. And there are many cons, and we will have to be ready to discuss and defend cohesion policy in spite of the criticism. So there is a slow implementation pace in the beginning of this programming period, and we expect that there will be so-called huge rows. That means a huge amount of commitments which are going to be materialized into payments after the period 2020. So these commitments of the current program period will affect the discussion on the next multi-annual financial framework. And also during the negotiations on 2014-2020, this was one of the main arguments of criticism from the net contributing countries. There is also a high error rate, which is estimated by the European Court of Auditors in its annual reports, which is one of the highest in cohesion policy of the expenditure policies. In 2015, it was estimated that 5.2% of the expenditures were somehow affected by error, and the average of the EU budget is 3.8, and the cohesion policy was 5.2. And the last thing is what I consider to be important is general over-regulation and very complicated system of cohesion policy implementation, which results in the slow implementation at the beginning and also in high error rate, and there should be a real discussion on the simplification. Some simplification discussion already has started, but for the next period we should discuss real and significant simplification and consolidation of the legislative framework of cohesion policy. On the revenue side, there will be discussion on the new own resources. We expect the Monti report on the revenue side and future of the EU budget, where most probably new own resources are going to be proposed, and also the discussion on the rebates, also in the context of the Brexit. The Czech position is rather traditional. We support more simpler, more transparent, fairer system of tradition and system based on traditional resources and GNI-based resource. And Brexit is a new element which will affect all the above mentioned factors, challenges, and the discussion will be very difficult, especially on the transitional period and on the how or the UK, or if the UK is going to fulfill all its budgetary commitments deriving from the period 2014-2020. And what can be so expected during the next negotiations? So it was also already said by Malgorzata, so we cannot, I think we cannot expect radical changes, especially on the expenditure side. Unanimity in Council allows only gradual adjustment traditionally in the new financial framework, and also the traditional focus on net budgetary balances prevents significant change of the expenditure side and removal of correction and rebates on the revenue side. Traditionally, there are four key elements for agreement of member states on the MFF, on the multi-financial financial framework. It's the volume of the EU budget, so we can expect probably around 1% of GNI, envelope for cohesion policy and for the CAP, and also for the net payers, important the correction mechanisms. And apart from these four key elements, there will be new one. It will be the Brexit element, and we will see how this Brexit will influence in negotiations on the conditions between the UK and the EU 27 will affect the MFF negotiations. Here I can conclude, so I would like to conclude in a positive way. So one thing which is, we can say, positive on the Brexit is that we are going to get rid of the UK rebate, and hopefully this can also lead to the discussion on the removal of other rebates on the revenue side, which really complicates the financing of the European Union. So thank you very much. I have to apologize. I will have to leave for my plan, but if you have questions or on me or regarding my presentation, feel free to email me, and I will answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your short and very insightful presentation. You mentioned the position of the Czech Republic, and let me briefly signal to you that in the events brochure you have a background document that underlines our discussion. And in this background document, which is very thoroughly prepared, you have the position of the Visegrad countries plus the official position of Romania regarding this topic. And I think that this is a good written document in which should direct all our discussions, both in Romania and also at the European level. With this very brief note, let me go to our next speaker. My pronunciation will be perfect. It is Stefan Jankovic.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for the opportunity to share with you our views on the MFF that are very similar to views of the Poland and the Czech Republic. So I have divided my presentation into 3 parts. The first part is covering the period from the deal on the current MFF to its midterm review that is currently on our tables. The second part is summarizing discussions on the MFF, on the next MFF we had so far, and the last part is dealing with the process that is ahead of us, I mean negotiations on the next financial perspective. So I will start with the first part. As Ambasada has mentioned, we had strategy Europe 2020, and then we established a budget for achieving of the goals of this strategy. I think that this approach was very logical, that we had a strategy and then we have money for achieving the goals we established before that. Now it seems that the strategy is not on our tables anymore, and can you imagine now we have 10 strategic priorities of the Commission on the one hand, then we have 5 strategic priorities of the Council, then EP, European Parliament has its own priorities and strategies, and that I think that it's, when you are the ordinary citizen sitting in the, I don't know, in some regions and you are looking for priorities of the EU, you cannot find it. You have strategic priorities of the Council and other institutions. I think that's the big mistake, and we should improve our communication in this regard, but I am not here to talk about the communication. So back to Strategy 2020. We established the budget, we established the strategy, and then we have seen that new crisis came. I mean, financial and economic crisis was longer than expected at the beginning, and then new crisis came, migration crisis, refugee crisis, and so on. So, and we have seen suddenly that the strategy that we established is not enough, and that the budget we established is not designed to answer those new needs. What was especially wrong from my point of view, I was at the time in Brussels, I was one of those guys who negotiated technical parts of the MFF, and the headings 3 and 4, that means the headings that are mostly focused on migration and security, were significantly reduced during the negotiations by the Council. And why those headings were reduced? Because there are no national envelopes in those headings. So it was easy target to reduce the money for migration, security, and those things. So I think that it was one of the biggest mistakes in estimation of the needs for future. The deal we achieved in the Council was problematic for the Parliament. Parliament was of the view that the budget should be higher, and Parliament wanted to secure that the new Parliament elected in 2014 will have the right, the word, to say something about, to adopt the priorities, expenditure priorities, according to its new needs. So that's why I asked Parliament for the revision clause that was included in the MFF regulation. Commission, based on this legislative commitment, submitted the proposal for the midterm review in September, in the middle of September. We as a presidency, we knew from the beginning that the midterm review will be the issue we will have to deal with, but what we didn't know was that when the proposal will be submitted, how the member states will react and what will be the content. But that's the role of the presidency to deal with the issues like this, but due to Brexit, the midterm review was postponed, and we were beginning to be more and more nervous about the timing of the proposal, but at the end we managed to achieve a almost deal in the Council in the record time in 2 months. So that means that on 14th of September there was a proposal of the Commission, and we achieved the deal at the level of the Council in the middle of the November, on 15th of November, with the exception of one member state was in difficulties and needed more time to evaluate the presidency compromise proposal. The main elements of the proposal you can see on this slide. We are able in this situation when the national budgets are very outstretched to secure financial boost for more significant political areas like migration, youth unemployment, and this boost is really significant. 5 billion is a huge amount of money, and more However, we were able to secure an increase of flexibility of the budget in order to secure better reaction for unforeseen needs. Now we are at the stage when we are negotiating this package with the European Parliament, and we will see how it will develop in the weeks to come, but now our ambition is still to achieve the agreement till the end of the presidency. Now let me move to another topic. On this slide, I tried to summarize the discussion we had so far on the MFF. Everything started in Amsterdam. The result of the Amsterdam is summarized in so-called Amsterdam map. I believe many of you have seen this map. This is a huge map covering all the issues we should change in the budget in close future, and I think there was a huge appetite for reconstruction of the budget. My impression was when I was on my way home from Amsterdam that we are going to really change the budget. But then in April, the Netherlands presidency organized informal GAC council, and ministers reacted to changes, to propose changes much more lower, how to say it. The appetite was not so huge, you know. It is something different to talk about the budget at forum which is not very formal and at conferences, and there is total difference when you are sitting in the chair of the politician and you have to say that let's go to change something radically. So that was my perception, at least. That's not the perception of the Slovak presidency. Then discussion continued in Berlin in July. There was a conference organized by Federal Ministry of Finance, and this conference was mainly focused on one issue, and that was that the future MFF should be more connected to country-specific recommendations. So that means that budget responsibility should be enhanced via expenditure of the EU budget. Based on these experiences with the negotiations on the next MFF, we decided to discuss in Bratislava two specific issues, and that is the financial instruments, FC and so on the one hand, and the traditional way of spending, that means grants. That was the one topic we wanted to discuss, and the second one was new balance between growth and jobs, that means cohesion policy, research and development and so on the one hand, and the new priorities like security, migration, refugees on the other hand. Because it's clear that in the new MFF we have to find new balance between those priorities, and it would be optimal if this new balance would be not on the account of the traditional policies like cohesion and CAP. We had more than 100 participants in Bratislava. Keynote speakers were Vice Commissioner of the Commission, Georgieva, Chairman of the Budget Committee of the Council, Jean Arthuis, and Permanent Representative of the Slovak Republic in Brussels, Peter Jarovčík. Main results of the discussion in Bratislava we can summarize like that. The new MFF must reflect the citizens' needs. That was the main message. Everything was about the citizens' needs. It was a couple of months after Brexit, and I think that that moment influenced the outcome of our conference. Second thing that was highlighted was that we need to move from the situation where more attention is about the rate of spending, but we need to more focus on the results, or the real results for citizens again. What was underlined in both workshops, because there were two workshops, was that cohesion policy supports growth and has brought a more balance in Europe. You know, that convergence is really achieved, not only between regions, but between people, among the people, through the cohesion policy. That was really an essential message from the Bratislava. And the growth policy should remain, despite new challenges, at the center, at the heart of the EU budget. And last, my conclusion was that grants and financial instruments, both ways of financing are very important, but we need to find where they should be applied, and they should be used when appropriate and efficient. Now I wanted to talk about the challenges ahead, but I think that it was totally described by Małgorzata and Michal and I would repeat what they said. I think that the volume of the budget is for sure the challenge on resources systems. I'm talking about reform of the current resources system. I'm very skeptical that the new resources will be implemented in the next MFF. Duration of the MFF cycle unity, I am running out of time, so I will short it. As regards the process, we spent 2 years in Brussels by negotiating this current MFF. The summit was also demanding. Summit in February 2013. After 28 hours, 28 member states achieved the deal on the MFF, but it was really tiring. So in Amsterdam, we started debate also on the question how to be more efficient in negotiations. And one of the proposals was a permanent chair for the negotiation process. That means that the negotiation process wouldn't be led by the presidencies that are going to be involved in this process: Bulgaria, Austria, Romania, Finland, maybe Croatia, we will see. But the process would be led by permanent chair. I am not sure about this proposal because it will not secure that we will achieve a better added value, better MFF at the end of the day. So we can consider it, but I don't think that it is a viable option. What is important for the presidencies involved is the role of the parliament. This is the main question we were asked during the negotiation of the midterm review, and it will be the same question for the presidency: how to approach parliament, how to involve parliament into negotiations and secure that the deal achieved at the end of the day will be acceptable for European parliaments. And concerning the interest groups of the member states, I think that there will be again a group of friends of cohesion and friends of better spending, something like that. And Małgorzata said that we should organize ourselves and to be more local, and I think she was totally right. Let me conclude by maybe too ambitious slide, but those are ambitions we are often listening to during these debates, that we need new priorities, new resources, budget focus on results, the budget must be connected with country-specific recommendations, and there should be European added value. European added value, I remember one quote, I don't know who said that everybody likes it because nobody knows what it is, and that's true. But this mentioning is leading me to my last remark, Joe Biden's quote: "Don't tell me what you value, show me what your budget is, and then I'll tell you what you value." And I hope that the next MFF will be MFF that will reflect our values, European values, and that will be reflected, that will reflect our new needs. Thank you.
And now let me hand over to our last panelist from Hungary, David Mezei, Deputy State Secretary for Rural Development Programming and for Rural Development Strategic Affairs at the Hungarian Prime Minister's Office. Please.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Bună ziua. Thank you very much for inviting me for this very important conference, and let me share our views, some comments on the multi-annual financial framework, and in particularly regarding the common agriculture policy and its consequences on the common agriculture policy, which I think is a very important, one of the most important European policies, definitely for our countries, for Romania, Poland. Probably our Czech colleagues do not share this view, but I hope that we can find a common point in the multi-annual financial framework at the end of the day. But we have been talking much about one scenario, which is the adoption of the new multi-annual framework in 2020. But I think we have to also think about another scenario, that what happens if there will be no financial framework adopted in 2020, which, taken into consideration some facts, is a very, very probable scenario. So we have to think about it. We have talked about the Brexit and the possible consequences of the Brexit, but there is another fact we have to take into consideration, that there will be a parliamentary election, European Parliament elections in 2019, and there will be a new Commission. And taking into consideration the time, the framework, the time which is necessary to adopt the new multi-annual financial framework, I seriously doubt that whether the new Commission and the new Parliament will have enough time to get through all this process, or if the process will start earlier than 2019, then the new Commission or the new Parliament will be ready to adopt the financial framework, a policy which will have been decided beforehand by another Commission, by another Parliament. So there will be at least two facts which let me say that which will according to which I think that it will be very risky, or it will be seriously doubted that there will be a new financial framework by 2020. In this case, all the expenditure will be continued on a rollover basis, on the basis of the last year of the current financial framework. And we also have to consider, we also have to think about it, whether it is advantages or whether it will be good for our countries or bad. And at this point, I would like to continue my presentation or my thoughts with the CAP. Because everybody is talking about the new CAP reform, and everybody connects the new CAP reform with the new financial framework. What could we expect from this reform? Definitely, the new reform, as a consequence, will reduce the budget of the CAP, and and in the framework of the new CAP, definitely, it will create for the farmers a more difficult regulatory framework. It will hinder the farmer. It will prevent them to benefit from this support. Why? Because, and this is now a common view in the European Union, that the aim of the CAP is to provide these public goods, environmental goods, and animal welfare, etc., etc. But the fact is that the European, according to our position, the European support, the main aim of the common agriculture policy is to compensate farmers, to compensate the competitive advantages caused by the very high European animal welfare and environmental standards. I think that we can share, and it's obvious for all of us, that the European farmers have to meet with very high standards. They have to fulfill very high requirements in the field of environment, one of the highest environmental standards they have to meet with, and it caused them serious losses and costs. And these costs, these competitive disadvantages, have been compensated partly by the commercial policy. We are applying, and we used to apply high tariffs and other tariff rate quotas, duties, and other commercial measures to compensate these comparative or competitive disadvantages. And the second measure is the support policy. What's happening in the commercial policy, in the trade policy? The European Union is in negotiations with other trade blocs, mainly bilateral negotiations with trade blocs, with the US, with the Mercosur countries, I think that the Mercosur countries are more important, more dangerous in terms of agriculture than the US. One thing is the outcome of these negotiations and the timing of the negotiations is very uncertain. So we cannot tell at this moment what will be the outcome of, for example, the TTIP or the Mercosur agreement. But what we certainly know that if these agreements will be concluded, all these tariff rates will be reduced, and the European farmers will have to face with a tougher competition in the agriculture markets. So one thing remains to defend our farmers from this competition. This is the support policy, and we have to be fair, and we have to be, I think, honest that the common agriculture policy is necessary not because of these environmental goods and animal welfare and etc. They are very important values. I think that they are very important values, and the European Union achievement is really considerable, and we have to, for example, we have to combat climate change. This is also very important political priorities. But the main cause of the agriculture support is to compensate farmers and to try to compensate and to try to maintain their competitivity vis-a-vis third world or third countries producers. In this respect, our position is to defend the CAP, to defend and Hungary wants to defend and retain the agriculture supports as it is. So we do not want to accept any reduction in the CAP supports. At least in nominal values, they have to be maintained and they have to preserved. We have to retain the two-pillar structure of the CAP. So we want to retain a strong first pillar, and we want to maintain a very, very strong second pillar within the agriculture policy. We have heard many rumors in Brussels that probably the Commission would like to move the second pillar, the rural development, from the agriculture policy to the structure policy. I think that it would be not good for European farmers. The rural development policy is strictly connected and has to be connected to the first pillar regarding, for example, the area-based payment, the agri-environmental measures, etc. So there are very close links between the two pillars, and the two pillars have to be preserved as it is today. Just for conclusions, I think that we have to keep in mind the second scenario. So when we are talking about the multi-annual financial framework, I think that we have to talk about these two options, two scenarios. And I think that for the interest of, from the view of our countries, I think that the second option saying that there will be no new multi-annual financial framework for 2020, and the current expenditure will be continued on a rollover basis. I think that's not it's not a bad option. It will be a huge failure for the European Union, I think. So from this point of view, if we cannot accept, if we are not able to accept a new financial framework, I think that it will be a failure for Europe. So if we want to keep the European Union strong, we have to find an agreement. We have to strike a deal in this respect, and I think that the Hungarian government wants a new financial framework from 2020. Definitely, this is our priority. This is our aim. But we have to take into consideration the second option. And the second, regarding the CAP, I think that a new reform is unavoidable. So we have to also be clear on this respect that the CAP will be reformed, but the question is timing, whether this reform will happen in 2020 or at a later period, for example in 2023, as it happened in 2003. The Franz Fischer reform, Hungary and Romania, Poland, Slovakia, we were not member of the European Union in that period, but we have to remember that in 2003, before 2004, 2003, there was an agricultural reform, and it was in the middle of the financial period, not in the beginning of the financial reform, and that was the Franz Fischer reform, the 2003 reform, which was a very profound, very important reform of the CAP, and it happened in the beginning, in the middle of a financial period. So I think we have to communicate to our farmers. I think that for the farmers, it's very important that they could work and they could farm their land in predictable, certain regulatory framework with a firm support policy, so they could see the future. And it's more, I think, that the stability of the support policy sometimes, not always, but sometimes more important than actually the actual sum, the actual amount of the support. So I think that we have to communicate them that the time of the reform, what could they expect from the financial framework and when. Thank you very much for your attention. Mulțumesc.
Thank you very much, David, for this presentation and for drawing our attention to a possible second scenario that there is no adoption of a new MFF. I think that we have a very short period of time for a burning question from the audience, so if somebody wants to address a very, very important question, please take a mic and say your question. Any comments? Okay.
Everybody's shocked.
Everybody's shocked, yes. It was a very, very relevant ending for our panel. So let me make some concluding remarks. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. Again, let me draw your attention to the background document, which is part of the event brochure. I am very glad that, as Margaret Malgorzata said, the discussion about the new MFF has already started, and I'm glad that Romania, by means of this event, is part of this conversation. I hope that this conversation will continue. And everybody, I am very glad about this final thought that we should also consider the scenario that there is no adoption, because our conference and all the discussion were premised on the idea that there will be a new MFF, and the discussion was how it will be designed, what will be the sum of money. But I think that we should all be prepared for this. And let me end by this quote from Joe Biden that was presented by our colleague, that don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. So hopefully in 2020 the European Union will have some budget in order to show its value. Thank you very much. And now we'll go on with the we have a 5-minute break. Thank you very much.